Christmas lights blinked red and green across the crowded restaurant, casting shadows that felt more accusatory than festive. Marcus Hayes sat across from a woman whose name he'd already started forgetting. Diane, maybe Diana, while she scrolled through her phone with the kind of deliberate disinterest that made his chest tighten. The blind date had been Julia's idea, his sister insisting that 6 years was long enough to grieve, long enough to be alone. He'd agreed because Sophie had drawn him a picture that morning, a reindeer with a crooked smile, and when he'd asked what she wanted for Christmas, she'd whispered that she wanted him to be happy again. The waiter refilled their water glasses. Marcus pulled out his phone, showing Diane the drawing. My daughter made this. She's 7, obsessed with reindeer this year. Diane's eyes flicked to the screen, then to his face, and something shifted in her expression. The polite smile vanished. She set down her fork with a soft clink that somehow felt louder than the holiday music bleeding through the speakers. You're a single dad. The question landed flat, stripped of curiosity or warmth. Marcus felt the familiar drop in his stomach, the one that had become routine over the past 6 months of attempting to date. 5 times now. 5 women who'd smiled until the word daughter entered the conversation, then found reasons to leave before dessert arrived. Yes, my wife passed away 6 years ago. Cancer. Diane was already reaching for her purse. No apology in her movements, no mercy in the tight line of her mouth. You're not my type. I'm sorry, but I don't think this is going to work. She stood, coat already in hand, and walked toward the exit without looking back. The other diners didn't notice. Why would they? To everyone else, it was just another failed date in a city full of them. Marcus sat frozen, staring at the empty chair across from him, at the half-eaten pasta she'd left behind. The humiliation settled in his bones, familiar and cold. He signaled for the check, pulling out his wallet, with hands that trembled just enough to make him angry at himself. Excuse me. The voice came from his left. Marcus turned to find a woman at the adjacent table, seated alone with a glass of red wine and an untouched plate of risotto. She looked out of place in this casual Denver restaurant, dark hair pulled into a sleek bun, a black blazer that probably cost more than his monthly rent, a watch that caught the light, with the kind of gleam that came from real money. 35, maybe. Her face held the kind of composure that came from boardrooms and negotiations, but her eyes were softer than her appearance suggested. I couldn't help but overhear. I'm sorry that happened to you. Marcus managed a tight smile. It's fine, I'm used to it. That doesn't make it better. She stood picking up her wine glass, and before Marcus could process what was happening, she slid into the chair Diane had vacated. Up close, she looked even more expensive. The kind of woman who belonged in penthouses and corner offices, not sitting across from a mid-level accountant in a chain restaurant on Christmas Eve. Can I buy you a drink? Marcus blinked. You don't have to do that. I know. She signaled the waiter ordered whiskey for both of them without asking what he wanted. The confidence in the gesture would have been off-putting if it hadn't also felt strangely reassuring. My name is Victoria Brennan. Marcus Hayes. The waiter brought their drinks. Victoria raised her glass in a toast that felt both ironic and sincere. To terrible blind dates and the people brave enough to keep trying. Marcus found himself laughing, a sound that felt foreign after the past hour. He picked up his glass, the whiskey burning warm down his throat. What makes you think I'll keep trying? Because you have a daughter who draws you reindeer. That means you still have hope. The observation hit harder than it should have. Marcus looked at this stranger who'd witnessed his humiliation and somehow turned it into something resembling human connection. You heard everything. I heard enough. Your date was rude. You deserve better. Victoria took a sip of her wine, and for the first time Marcus noticed the exhaustion around her eyes, the kind that came from carrying weight no one else could see. She looked like someone who understood loneliness in a way that went deeper than just being alone. My family has been trying to marry me off for 3 years. The words spilled out of her like a confession she hadn't meant to make. Every holiday dinner they parade eligible men in front of me like I'm supposed to pick one off a shelf. Lawyers, doctors, CEOs. Men who want 2 things, my money or my connections. Marcus found himself leaning forward. That sounds exhausting. It is. Victoria's fingers traced the rim of her wine glass. I built my company from nothing. Started in my garage 10 years ago writing software for small businesses that couldn't afford the big enterprise solutions. Now we have 200 employees and contracts across 3 states. And somehow that makes me less marriageable because successful women scare men, apparently. Not all men, maybe not, but the ones my parents approve of, definitely. She paused, something vulnerable flickering across her face. I can't have children. Medical condition, irreversible. When I told my ex-fiance, he called off the wedding. Said he wanted a real family. The bitterness in her voice made Marcus's chest ache. He knew that kind of hurt, the kind that came from being told you weren't enough, that the circumstances of your life made you unlovable. That's horrible, I'm sorry. Victoria shrugged, but the gesture didn't quite hide the pain underneath. It's reality. Every man I've dated since has had the same reaction. Either they want children or they pretend they don't until they realize I'm serious, and then they leave. So now my family thinks I'm being too picky. They don't understand that I'm not looking for perfect, I'm just looking for real. Marcus understood that longing more than he could articulate. 6 years of raising Sophie alone, of being both mother and father, of watching other families, and feeling like an outsider in a world built for pairs. Rachel had been his partner, his anchor, and without her, everything felt off balance. I heard you talking about your daughter before your date left. Victoria's voice gentled. You said she drew you a reindeer this morning. Yeah, Sophie. She's 7. Loves art more than anything. Marcus pulled out his phone again, showing Victoria the photo. This is her. Victoria studied the image of Sophie laughing at the park, her dark hair tangled from the swings, her smile missing 2 front teeth. Something in Victoria's expression shifted, a longing so raw it felt invasive to witness. She's beautiful. She is, and she's the reason I keep getting rejected. Marcus heard the edge in his own voice. Women say they understand that they're okay with me having a kid, but the moment they realize she's not just an accessory, that she's my whole life, they disappear. They're idiots. The certainty in Victoria's voice surprised him. She set down her wine glass and looked at him with an intensity that made him want to look away and lean closer at the same time. I want to meet her. Marcus froze. What? Your daughter, Sophie. I'd like to meet her. Victoria seemed to realize how that sounded because she quickly added, not as a date, just, I want to understand your life. Is that strange? It was strange. Ay, Shireen. Everything about this conversation was strange. The timing, the vulnerability, the way this polished stranger had inserted herself into his disaster of an evening and somehow made it feel less lonely. But Marcus found himself nodding, pulling out his phone to exchange numbers. Okay, sure, why not? Victoria smiled, and it transformed her face from beautiful to something warmer. She stood, leaving cash on the table for her untouched meal, and wrote her number on a napkin before handing it to Marcus. Call me when you're Aishet, no pressure, just think about it. She walked away before he could respond, disappearing into the Denver night with the kind of grace that came from years of making exits. Marcus sat alone again, but this time the solitude felt different, lighter. He looked at the napkin with Victoria's number written in precise script, then at the photo of Sophie on his phone. For the first time in 6 years, the future felt like it might hold something other than routine and resignation. The phone rang 3 days later. Not Marcus calling Victoria, but Victoria calling him, her voice tight with a strain that immediately put him on alert. Marcus, it's Victoria, from the restaurant. I know this is sudden, but I need help. Work help, not. It's complicated. Do you have time to talk? Marcus glanced at his computer screen at the spreadsheet he'd been staring at for the past hour without really seeing. Morrison and Associates was quiet the week between Christmas and New Year's, most of the partners taking vacation time. He'd come in because staying home with too much time to think was worse than the monotony of an empty office. I have time. What's going on? Victoria's exhale crackled through the speaker. My CFO quit yesterday. Just walked out, left everything in chaos. We have an IRS audit scheduled for Monday 2 days from now, and I just discovered he made errors in our Q4 tax filings. Major errors. If the audit finds these mistakes, we're looking at penalties that could cripple the company. Marcus's accountant brain immediately started sorting through possibilities, none of them good. How major are we talking? I don't know. That's the problem. I understand software and business development, but accounting isn't my strength. I need someone who can look at this mess and tell me how bad it is. and then fix it if possible. Why me? Because you're an accountant, because you helped me once already just by being kind, and because Victoria paused. Because I trust you. I know that sounds insane since we just met, but my instincts about people are usually good. Will you help me? Marcus should have said no. Should have explained that taking on this kind of emergency work without proper vetting, without contracts, without even knowing the scope of the problem, violated every professional protocol he'd ever learned. But something in Victoria's voice, the vulnerability beneath the competence, made him grab his coat. Give me your address. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Brennan Tech Solutions occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in downtown Denver, the kind of building that screamed success and intimidated anyone who walked through its doors. Victoria met Marcus in the lobby, looking nothing like the polished woman from the restaurant. Her hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her blazer had been replaced by a simple sweater that looked like she'd slept in it. Thank you for coming. She led him to the elevator, her words tumbling out in a rush. I've been going through the files since yesterday. The more I find, the worse it gets. I don't understand how he let this happen. He was with the company for 5 years. The executive floor was empty except for a few security lights. Victoria's office overlooked the city floor-to-ceiling windows, framing the Rocky Mountains in the distance. Her desk was buried under printouts in file folders, a laptop displaying spreadsheet after spreadsheet of financial data. Marcus set down his briefcase and started examining the documents. It took him less than 15 minutes to see the depth of the problem. The former CFO hadn't just made errors, he'd been incompetent at best, negligent at worst. Depreciation schedules that violated generally accepted accounting principles, payroll tax withholdings calculated incorrectly, research and development tax credits that had never been claimed. How bad is it? Marcus looked up to find Victoria watching him, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold the pieces together through sheer will. Bad, but not unfixable. He started making notes, his mind already working through solutions. Your depreciation schedule is wrong, not following GAAP. The payroll tax withholding is short by about $47,000. That's going to trigger immediate penalties. Victoria's face went pale. $47,000. But Marcus continued pulling up another spreadsheet. He never claimed your R&D tax credits. You're entitled to roughly $120,000 in refunds that you haven't collected. That more than covers the shortfall. The relief that flooded Victoria's expression was almost painful to watch. She sank into her chair, pressing her palms against her eyes. Can you fix it before Monday? Marcus looked at the mountain of work spread across the desk. Recalculating depreciation schedules, correcting payroll filings, preparing R&D credit documentation, organizing everything into a presentation that would satisfy an IRS auditor. 36 hours of work, maybe 40 if he wanted to sleep. Yes, but I'll need access to all your financial systems, and I'll probably need to work straight through the weekend. Done. Whatever you need. Victoria stood, pulling out her phone. I'll order food, set up a workspace for you. Just tell me what you need. They worked through Friday night and into Saturday morning. Marcus discovered that accounting was like assembling a puzzle. Once you found the pattern, the pieces fell into place. Garrett had taught him that during his first year at Morrison and Associates, back when Marcus was fresh out of college and terrified of making mistakes. The key wasn't just knowing the rules. It was understanding how the rules fit together to tell a story. Every line item in a balance sheet represented a decision someone made, a priority they chose. Good accounting revealed truth. Bad accounting obscured it. By Saturday afternoon, Marcus had reorganized Brennan Tech's entire Q4 filing. He'd corrected the depreciation errors, recalculated the payroll taxes, and prepared the R&D credit claim with supporting documentation that would withstand any scrutiny. Victoria brought him coffee every few hours, occasionally sitting at the conference table to answer questions about specific transactions. But mostly she just watched him work with an expression that mixed gratitude and disbelief. How did you find all this so fast? She gestured at the revised spreadsheets filling the monitor. My CFO had a master's degree from Wharton. Marcus leaned back in his chair, rolling the tension from his shoulders. Degrees tell you someone passed tests. Experience tells you they can handle reality. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've seen every kind of mistake there is. Still, this is... Victoria trailed off, shaking her head. You just saved my company. You know that, right? If the IRS had found these errors, the penalties would have been catastrophic. We might not have survived it. Accounting is like stacking dominoes. Marcus stood stretching muscles that ached from sitting too long. One piece falls wrong and everything else comes down with it. The trick is finding the pattern before the collapse. Victoria smiled, and Marcus realized he was starting to recognize the different kinds of smiles. She had the professional one, the sad one, and this one, which was real. That's a good metaphor. Garrett taught me that, my colleague at Morrison. He's been doing this for 20 years. Says accounting is just storytelling with numbers. The IRS audit on Monday went smoothly. The auditor, a severe woman in her 50s, who'd probably seen every scheme and shortcut imaginable, reviewed Marcus's documentation with the kind of thoroughness that made 3 hours feel like 3 days. But when she finally closed her laptop and stood to leave, her expression held something close to approval. Your filings are in order. You'll receive confirmation within 2 weeks, but I don't anticipate any issues. Victoria waited until the auditor left before letting out a breath that sounded like she'd been holding it for days. She turned to Marcus, and for a moment he thought she might hug him. Instead, she just stood there, emotions cycling across her face too quickly to name. I can't thank you enough. You saved everything I've built. Marcus felt uncomfortable with the gratitude, with the weight of being someone's hero. He'd just done his job, applied skills he'd spent years developing. Nothing heroic about that. You don't need to thank me. Just, when you're ready, let me meet Sophie. Victoria's expression shifted into something softer. I'd like that. I'd really like that. Saturday morning arrived cold and bright, the kind of Denver winter day that made the mountains look close enough to touch. Marcus made Sophie her favorite breakfast, chocolate chip pancakes with extra syrup, while trying not to let his nervousness show. He told her last night that they were meeting someone at the park, a friend of his named Victoria, and Sophie had bombarded him with questions until he gently reminded her it was bedtime. Now watching his daughter drown her pancakes in syrup, Marcus wondered if he was making a mistake. Sophie had been 3 when Rachel died. She barely remembered her mother, and Marcus had worked hard to keep Rachel's memory alive through photos and stories. But he'd also been careful not to introduce other women into Sophie's life. The few times he'd tried dating, he'd kept it separate, unwilling to let Sophie meet someone who might disappear. Victoria was different. He couldn't explain why, couldn't point to anything concrete that made the situation feel safer. Maybe it was the loneliness he'd seen in her eyes, the way she'd understood rejection without him having to explain it. Or maybe it was just wishful thinking, the desperate hope that maybe finally someone would stay. Dad, are we going to the park now? Sophie's voice pulled him back to the present. She was already putting on her coat, the purple one with the fake fur hood that she insisted was the most beautiful thing she owned. Marcus helped her with the zipper, his hands fumbling slightly. Yeah, kiddo, we're meeting my friend Victoria. Remember I told you about her? Is she your girlfriend? The question was so direct, so innocent that Marcus almost laughed. No, baby, just a friend. Okay. Sophie accepted this with the easy logic of 7-year-olds. Can we feed the ducks? That's the plan. Washington Park was 15 minutes from their house, a sprawling green space with a lake that attracted ducks year-round. Marcus spotted Victoria immediately. She was standing by the water's edge, dressed in jeans and a wool sweater, instead of her usual business attire, her hair down and catching the sunlight. She looked younger this way, less guarded, more like someone who might actually fit into his life. Sophie ran ahead, her energy boundless, despite the cold. Marcus followed, his heart beating faster than the situation warranted. Victoria turned as they approached, and the smile that crossed her face when she saw Sophie was so genuine, it made something in Marcus's chest loosen. Hi. Victoria crouched down to Sophie's eye level, not towering over her the way so many adults did with children. You must be Sophie. I'm Victoria. Sophie studied her with the kind of intense scrutiny only children could pull off. Are you my dad's friend? I am. Is that okay with you? I guess. Sophie shrugged with the non-committal approval of childhood, then held up the bag of breadcrumbs Marcus had brought. Do you want to feed the ducks? Dad said we could? Victoria's smile widened. I'd love to. They walked to the edge of the lake, Sophie chattering about school and her art teacher and the reindeer she'd been trying to draw all week. Victoria listened with the kind of attention that felt rare, not the performative listening adults sometimes did with kids, but genuine interest. She asked questions, laughed at Sophie's stories, knelt beside her in the cold grass to point out which ducks looked the hungriest. Marcus stood back watching them together and felt something shift in his chest. Hope, maybe, or just the desperate wish that this moment could stretch into something lasting. After the ducks, they walked through the park. Sophie ran ahead, checking back every few minutes to make sure Marcus and Victoria were following. The January air bit through Marcus's coat, but he barely felt it. Victoria walked beside him, close enough that their arms occasionally brushed. "Thank you for this." Victoria's voice was quiet, almost lost in the wind. "For trusting me with her. She seems to like you." "I like her too. She's—" Victoria trailed off, watching Sophie cartwheel across the grass with the kind of reckless joy that came from not yet knowing how cruel the world could be. "She's wonderful." Sophie ran back to them, breathless and pink-cheeked. "Victoria, do you want to see my room? I have drawings I can show you." Marcus started to say no, to explain that they should probably head home, but Victoria was already nodding. "I'd love to see your drawings." The drive back to Marcus's house took 10 minutes. He felt self-conscious, pulling into the driveway of his modest three-bedroom rental, knowing Victoria probably lived somewhere with doormen and marble lobbies. But she didn't seem to notice or care. She followed Sophie inside, complimenting the living room with its worn couch and walls covered in framed photos. She was beautiful. Victoria had stopped in front of a picture of Rachel taken at Sophie's first birthday party. "Your wife." Marcus swallowed past the lump in his throat. "Yeah, she was." Victoria didn't ask questions, didn't push for details. She just stood there for a moment, honoring the woman in the photograph, before Sophie grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the stairs. Sophie's room was an explosion of color. Drawings covered every surface, taped to the walls, scattered across the desk, piled on the floor in precarious stacks. Victoria moved through the space like she was touring a gallery, stopping to examine each piece with serious consideration. "You're very talented, Sophie." "Thank you," Sophie beamed, pulling out her favorite drawings to show Victoria. "This one is a dragon, and this one is supposed to be a butterfly, but it looks more like a blob." Victoria studied the butterfly blob with the kind of focus usually reserved for important documents. "I think it's beautiful. Can I try drawing something?" Sophie handed over crayons with the enthusiasm of someone finally finding an adult who understood. They sat on the floor together, Victoria attempting to draw a rabbit that looked more like a misshapen potato. Sophie laughed so hard she fell over, and the sound filled the house with a warmth Marcus hadn't felt in years. When Victoria finally left 2 hours later, Sophie hugged her goodbye without being prompted. Marcus watched from the doorway as Victoria's car pulled away, and for the first time since Rachel died, he let himself imagine a future that looked different from the past. The months that followed developed a rhythm. Victoria came over most weekends, sometimes bringing art supplies for Sophie, sometimes just showing up to help with dinner or watch movies on the worn couch. They went to museums and parks and bookstores, always the three of them together, building something that felt like family without anyone naming it. In mid-January, they visited the Science Museum. Sophie asked 1,000 questions about the robot exhibit, and Victoria answered each one with patience that felt limitless. Marcus stood back watching them examine circuits and motors and realized he was falling in love. Not just with Victoria's kindness toward his daughter, but with the way she laughed at bad jokes, the way she sang off-key in the car, the way she looked at him sometimes like maybe he was worth fighting for. By February, they'd fallen into a routine of Sunday dinners. Victoria would arrive with wine or dessert, and they'd cook together while Sophie did homework at the kitchen table. The conversations grew deeper, moving past surface pleasantries into the territory of real intimacy. Victoria told him about her mother dying in a car accident when she was 12, how she'd learned early that loss was just part of living. Marcus told her about watching Rachel fade over 2 years of treatment, how he'd promised her he would take care of Sophie, would find a way to be enough for both of them. "You are enough." Victoria said it with such certainty that Marcus almost believed her. More than enough. They were washing dishes, Sophie already in bed, and the kitchen felt smaller, with Victoria standing so close. Marcus could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive, that made him want to lean in. "Sometimes I'm not sure. I look at Sophie and think about everything she's missed. Birthday parties where both parents show up, bedtime stories from her mom, all the little moments Rachel should have been here for." Victoria dried the last plate, setting it in the cabinet with careful precision. Sophie is happy. Anyone can see that. You've given her stability and love and a home where she feels safe. That's not enough. That's everything. Marcus wanted to kiss her. The impulse came so suddenly it shocked him, made him take a step back and grip the edge of the sink to steady himself. Victoria must have seen something in his expression because her face softened. I should go, it's late. But she didn't move toward the door. They stood in the kitchen, the space between them, charged with all the things they hadn't said, and Marcus felt brave and terrified in equal measure. Victoria, I know. She smiled, sad and hopeful at once. I know. Valentine's Day fell on a Friday. Marcus asked Evelyn to watch Sophie, his sister, immediately agreeing with the kind of knowing grin that made him want to both thank her and hide. He made reservations at an Italian restaurant, nothing fancy but nicer than their usual spots, and picked Victoria up at her apartment for the first time. She answered the door in a blue dress that made Marcus forget how to breathe. Her hair was down, catching light from the chandelier in her entryway, and she was smiling like maybe she was nervous too. You look beautiful. You clean up pretty well yourself. The restaurant was intimate, candles on each table and soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. They talked about everything and nothing: Victoria's latest software development project, Marcus's ongoing battle with a client who refused to organize their receipts, the book Sophie was reading about a girl who discovered she could talk to animals. I want to tell you something. Victoria's fingers traced the stem of her wine glass, a nervous gesture Marcus had started to recognize. About my family. Okay. They don't know about you, about Sophie. She said it quickly, like ripping off a bandage. Not because I'm ashamed. I'm not. But my parents are complicated. They have expectations. And I know that if I tell them I'm dating someone, they'll want to meet you, and it will become this whole thing where they judge and analyze and make assumptions. Marcus felt the old familiar ache, the one that came from knowing he wasn't quite good enough. I understand. No, you don't. Victoria reached across the table, taking his hand. I don't care what they think. I just want to protect this. Us, for as long as possible. What is this exactly? The question came out rougher than Marcus intended. What are we doing here? Victoria's thumb traced circles on his palm, the touch sending electricity up his arm. I don't know, but I know I want to keep doing it. I know that Sophie makes me laugh and you make me feel seen. And for the first time in my life, I'm not lonely. Marcus squeezed her hand. I'm not lonely anymore either. They talked until the restaurant started closing, the waiter hovering nearby with the kind of patience that suggested he'd seen this before, two people so caught up in each other they forgot the world existed. When they finally left, Victoria's hand found his on the walk to the car, their fingers interlacing like they'd been doing this for years. March brought warmth and the kind of restless energy that came with spring. Victoria started staying later after Sophie went to bed, and the conversation shifted from careful to raw. She told him about her ex-fiancé, about the moment she'd revealed her infertility, and watched his face close off like a door slamming shut. Marcus told her about the months after Rachel's funeral when getting out of bed felt impossible, and Sophie was the only thing that kept him going. I don't want to replace her. Victoria's voice was quiet, almost lost in the silence of Marcus's living room. Rachel, I know Sophie's mother will always be part of your lives, and I would never try to erase that. I know. Marcus did know, had seen the careful way Victoria included Rachel in conversations with Sophie, asking about the stories Marcus told, looking at photos without jealousy or resentment. But I need to know where this is going. For Sophie's sake, I can't introduce someone into her life and then have them leave. Victoria moved closer on the couch, close enough that Marcus could count her heartbeats. I'm not going anywhere, unless you want me to. I don't want you to go. The admission felt like jumping off a cliff. I want you to stay. I want more than this. The kiss happened naturally, inevitably, like they'd been moving toward this moment since that first night in the restaurant. Victoria's lips were soft against his, tasting like the wine they'd been sharing. And Marcus felt something unlock in his chest, 6 years of grief and loneliness and fear, finally releasing their grip. When they pulled apart, Victoria's eyes were bright with tears. I'm falling in love with you. Both of you. Is that crazy? If it is, then I'm crazy too, they told Sophie the next day. She was eating cereal at the kitchen table when Victoria arrived for their usual Saturday morning, and Marcus felt his hands shake as he sat down across from his daughter. Sophie, Victoria, and I want to talk to you about something. Sophie looked up, milk dripping from her spoon. Okay. Victoria and I were dating, like officially. Is that okay with you? Sophie's face broke into the biggest smile Marcus had seen in months. Finally, I thought you'd never ask her. Victoria laughed, relief flooding her expression. You're okay with this? Are you kidding? Victoria is the best. Sophie jumped up, throwing her arms around Victoria's waist. Does this mean you'll come to my art show at school next week? I wouldn't miss it. April arrived with cherry blossoms and the kind of hope Marcus had forgotten existed. He and Victoria had settled into a relationship that felt both new and comfortable, like they'd been doing this for years instead of months. Sophie called Victoria by her first name, not Mom. They'd all agreed that was a conversation for later if ever, but the bond between them was undeniable. Garrett noticed a change at work, commenting one Tuesday afternoon that Marcus seemed lighter. It's the woman, isn't it? The one you helped with the tax crisis? Marcus didn't deny it. Victoria, yeah. Good for you, man. You deserve this. Garrett clapped him on the shoulder, his smile genuine. Rachel would want you to be happy. You know that, right? Marcus did know. In his quieter moments, he imagined conversations with Rachel, telling her about Victoria and Sophie's laughter, and the way it felt to hope again. He liked to think she'd approve, that she'd see how hard he tried to keep his promises and forgive him for finally letting someone else in. By mid-April, Victoria started bringing up her parents more frequently. The subject always made her tense shoulders drawing up and voice taking on an edge it didn't usually have. They want to meet you. They were at Red Rocks Park, Sophie running ahead to climb the red sandstone formations, while Marcus and Victoria walked the trail. The statement hung in the air between them, weighted with everything it implied. When come soon, they know I'm seeing someone seriously. If I keep putting them off, they'll start making assumptions. Victoria stopped walking, turning to face him. I want you to meet them. I do. I just need you to understand that they can be difficult. Marcus had met difficult parents before. He'd survived dinners with Rachel's father, who'd made it clear that an accountant wasn't good enough for his daughter until the wedding day, when he'd pulled Marcus aside and admitted he was wrong. But something in Victoria's voice suggested this was different. What aren't you telling me? Victoria's jaw tightened. They're going to judge you, both of you. They'll look at your room and your house and Sophie, and they'll decide you're not good enough for me. And I need you to know that their opinion doesn't matter, that I don't care what they think, but they're still your parents. Yeah, Victoria's voice cracked slightly. They're still my parents. The dinner was scheduled for mid-May, giving Marcus 3 weeks to spiral into increasing anxiety. Victoria tried to downplay it, insisting her parents were just protective, but the tension in her shoulders whenever the subject came up told a different story. Marcus bought a new suit, the first one he'd purchased in 5 years, and helped Sophie pick out a dress that she declared made her look like a princess. The night before the dinner, Evelyn stopped by with advice Marcus hadn't asked for. Don't let them intimidate you. You're a good man with a good job and a great kid. If they can't see that it's their problem, not yours. Marcus wanted to believe her, but lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling while Sophie slept down the hall, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to walk into something that would change everything. The Brennan mansion sat in Cherry Hills Village, the kind of neighborhood where driveways had gates and houses had names instead of numbers. Marcus felt his stomach drop as they pulled up at the structure that looked more like a museum than a home. White columns, manicured lawns, a fountain in the circular driveway that probably cost more than his annual salary. Sophie pressed her face against the car window. Is this a castle? Something like that? Marcus's hands were sweating on the steering wheel. Victoria had offered to pick them up, but he'd insisted on driving, some stubborn part of him needing to maintain control of at least this small piece of the evening. Victoria met them at the door and Marcus barely recognized her. She'd transformed back into the woman from that first night at the restaurant, hair in a tight bun black cocktail dress, heels that added 3 inches to her height. The warmth was gone from her eyes, replaced by the kind of armor people wore when they expected battle. You look different. Sophie's observation was innocent, curious, but Victoria flinched anyway. Fancy dinner, remember? Come on, let me introduce you. The interior of the mansion matched its exterior marble floors, crystal chandeliers, art on the walls that Marcus suspected was original and priceless. Sophie held his hand tighter, her earlier excitement replaced by something that looked like fear. Marcus wanted to turn around to grab his daughter and run back to their small safe house where they belonged. Robert and Catherine Brennan waited in the formal living room. Robert was tall and imposing in an expensive suit, his handshake crushing Marcus's fingers with deliberate pressure. Catherine wore pearls and a smile that never reached her eyes, her gaze sweeping over Marcus and Sophie with the kind of assessment that made Marcus feel like livestock at auction. "How lovely to meet you both." The words were perfectly polite, the tone in the Arctic. Dinner was 7 courses served in a dining room that could have seated 20. Sophie looked overwhelmed, staring at the array of silverware with confusion. Marcus quietly showed her which fork to use, acutely aware of Catherine's gaze, tracking every movement. The interrogation started with the salad course. "So Marcus, what do you do for work?" Robert's question sounded casual, but Marcus recognized the trap. "I'm an accountant, senior level at Morrison and Associates downtown." Morrison and Associates, Robert repeated the name like he was testing its weight. "Can't say I've heard of it." "We're mid-sized, about 40 employees. We focus on small to medium businesses, some nonprofit work." "How quaint." The dismissal was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus felt Victoria stiffen beside him, her hand clenching around her fork. Catherine turned her attention to Sophie. "And you're raising your daughter alone. That must be quite challenging." "It has its moments, but Sophie's worth it." "I'm sure." Catherine's smile was sharp enough to cut. "Children that age need stability, structure, a proper family unit." Marcus's jaw tightened. "She has that." "Does she?" Robert leaned back in his chair, the gesture somehow making him seem larger. "A single father working a modest job. No mother figure. I'm not sure I'd call that ideal." Victoria's fork clattered against her plate. "Father, that's enough." "I'm just being realistic, Victoria. We can't ignore facts." The facts apparently continued through the main course. Catherine asked pointed questions about Sophie's school, her activities, her future plans. Each question felt designed to highlight everything Marcus couldn't provide: the private tutors, the expensive camps, the connections that came from being born into the right family. By the time dessert arrived, Marcus felt like he'd been flayed open. Sophie sat silently picking at her food, and Marcus recognized the expression on her face, the same one she wore when kids at school made fun of her for not having a mom. "Can you provide for Victoria's lifestyle?" Robert's question cut through the tension like a blade. "The travel, the social obligations, the expectations that come with her position. With all due respect, Sir Victoria doesn't need me to provide anything. She's perfectly capable of taking care of herself." "That's not the point." Catherine set down her wine glass with a sharp click. "Victoria deserves exceptional. She's built an empire. She comes from a distinguished family, and you want her to throw that away to play mother to someone else's child." The words hit Sophie like a physical blow. Her fork dropped, tears springing to her eyes, and Marcus felt rage flood through him so completely he couldn't breathe. "Excuse me." He stood his chair, scraping against the floor. "Sophie, we're leaving." Victoria was on her feet immediately. "Marcus, please wait. Let me talk to them." "Talk to them?" Marcus heard his voice rising, couldn't seem to stop it. "They just called my daughter a burden. There's nothing to talk about." He took Sophie's hand, her small fingers trembling in his. Catherine opened her mouth to say something, but Marcus was already moving toward the door, pulling Sophie with him, desperate to get her away from people who could look at a 7-year-old and see only an obstacle. "Marcus, please." Victoria followed them into the foyer. "They're wrong. They don't understand." "They understand perfectly." Marcus's hand shook as he helped Sophie into her coat. "We're not good enough. They made that very clear." "I don't think that. You know I don't think that. But your family does, and they always will." Marcus looked at Victoria, really looked at her, and saw the truth she'd been trying to hide. "Every holiday, every family event, will be the outsiders. Sophie will feel it. I saw her face in there. I won't put her through that again." The ride home was silent except for Sophie's quiet crying. Marcus gripped the steering wheel hard enough to hurt fury and shame and helplessness warring in his chest. He'd known better. had known from the start that he and Victoria came from different worlds, that money and class and family legacy mattered in ways he couldn't overcome. But he'd let himself hope anyway, and now his daughter was paying the price. At home, he tucked Sophie into bed, smoothing her hair back while she clung to her stuffed rabbit. "They hate me." Her voice was so small it broke his heart. "They don't hate you, baby. They just don't know you. They think I'm bad. They think I'm making everything wrong." Marcus felt tears burn his eyes. He'd done this, brought her into that house, exposed her to people who looked at her and saw only inadequacy. "You're not bad. You're perfect. And anyone who can't see that doesn't matter." He stayed until she fell asleep, then went downstairs to find his phone lit up with messages from Victoria. He deleted them without reading each one, a reminder of his own stupidity. The doorbell rang around 9 and Marcus knew it was her before he opened it. Victoria looked destroyed, makeup smeared, eyes red from crying, hair falling out of its bun. "Please let me explain." "Explain what?" Marcus couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "That your parents think I'm beneath you. You already knew that. I don't care what they think. I told you that. But you should care. They're your family, your world." Marcus felt exhausted suddenly, the fight draining out of him. "Look at us, Victoria. Really look. You live in a penthouse. I rent a 3-bedroom house in a middle-class neighborhood. You run a company. I sit in a cubicle pushing papers. We don't fit. That doesn't matter to me. It matters to them. And it will matter every single time we're together. Every birthday, every Christmas, every family gathering." Marcus's voice cracked. "Sophie will be reminded constantly that she's not good enough, that she's the reason I can't have better. I saw her face tonight. I heard what your mother said. I won't subject my daughter to a lifetime of that." Victoria stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "So you're just giving up? You're not even going to fight?" "I'm protecting my daughter." "By pushing me away? What about what Sophie wants? She loves me, Marcus. I know she does. And I love her." "It's not enough." The words tasted like ash. "Muff isn't enough when the world keeps telling a 7-year-old she's not wanted. My parents aren't the world. They're your world." Marcus felt something break in his chest. "And they made it very clear tonight we will never be part of it." "Not really. We'll always be the charity case you took on the people who aren't quite good enough. But you keep around anyway because you're too kind to let us go." "That's not true. That's not fair." "Maybe not." Marcus's hands were shaking. "But it's reality. And I won't make Sophie live in it." Victoria was crying openly now. "So you're choosing for her, you're not even going to ask what she wants." "She's 7 years old. She doesn't understand." "She understands that someone cares about her, and you're taking that away because you're scared." "I'm being realistic." "You're being a coward." The words came out sharp, angry, and Marcus flinched like she'd hit him. "Get out." "Marcus, get out of my house. We're done." Victoria stared at him, and Marcus watched hope die in her eyes. She turned without another word and walked to her car. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow felt louder than shouting. Marcus stood in the empty foyer, his whole body trembling. From upstairs came the sound of a door opening. Sophie woken by the raised voices. Her footsteps patted down the stairs, and when Marcus turned, she was standing there in her pajamas, clutching her rabbit, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, is Victoria gone?" Marcus couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. He nodded. "Forever." The word hung in the air between them, final and devastating. Marcus wanted to lie, to promise it would be okay, but he'd never lied to Sophie before and couldn't start now. "Yes, sweetheart, probably forever." Sophie's face crumpled. "But I don't want her to go. But is it because of me? Because her parents don't like me?" "No, baby. It's not because of you." "See, yes, it is." Sophie's voice rose to a shout, something Marcus had never heard from her before. "They said I was bad. They said you can't give me good things. They said Victoria shouldn't be with us because of me, and you let them. You sent her away." She ran back upstairs, her door slamming so hard the wall shook. Marcus sank to the floor, his back against the door, and let himself cry for the first time since Rachel's funeral. He'd wanted to protect Sophie from being hurt, from feeling unwanted, from the pain of loving someone who might leave. Instead, he'd taught her that she was the reason good things couldn't happen, that loving her meant sacrificing everything else, that she was a burden too heavy to carry alongside happiness. The house felt emptier than it ever had, hollowed out by the absence of someone who'd only been there for 4 months, but had somehow become essential. Marcus sat in the dark, listening to his daughter cry herself to sleep upstairs, and wondered how protecting her had ended up hurting her more than anything else ever could have. 3 days passed in a silence that felt like drowning. Sophie moved through the house like a ghost, eating when Marcus put food in front of her going to school, because he made her coming home and disappearing into her room without a word. The drawing stopped. That hurt worst of all, watching her art supplies gather dust while she sat on her bed staring at nothing. Marcus tried everything he could think of. He made her favorite meals, suggested trips to the bookstore, even offered to let her skip her weekly piano lesson. Sophie just shook her head, her eyes hollow in a way that reminded him too much of the months after Rachel's funeral. She'd been 3, then barely able to understand why mommy wasn't coming home. Now she was 7 and understood perfectly. Understood that happiness could be snatched away, that the people you loved could disappear, that sometimes your own father was the one who made them leave. The morning of the 4th day, Marcus burned the toast. He stood at the counter, watching smoke rise from the toaster, unable to muster the energy to care. His reflection in the kitchen window looked haggard, dark circles, shadowing eyes that felt permanently gritty from lack of sleep. Morrison and Associates felt like a prison when he arrived. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making his headache worse, and the spreadsheet on his monitor swam in and out of focus no matter how many times he blinked. He was reviewing tax returns for a construction company, numbers that should have made sense but kept rearranging themselves into meaningless patterns. Garrett Sullivan appeared in the cubicle entrance, around 10 coffee in one hand, and concern etched across his face. "You look like death warmed over." Marcus didn't look up from his screen. "Thanks. I'm serious, man. You've been staring at that same cell for 20 minutes. Garrett pulled up the spare chair, settling into it with the determination of someone who wasn't leaving until he got answers. "What's going on?" "Nothing. I'm fine." "You're not fine. You've made 3 errors in the Reynolds account this week." "3. You never make errors." Garrett's voice softened. "Talk to me." The kindness broke something loose. Marcus Fall. Marcus felt the words spill out before he could stop them. Meeting Victoria on Christmas, the months of building something that felt like hope. The disaster of the dinner with her parents. The choice he'd made to protect Sophie that had somehow destroyed her instead. Garrett listened without interrupting his expression, shifting from surprise to understanding to something that looked like disappointment. "You remember when Laura left me?" Marcus did remember. 2 years ago, Garrett's wife had filed for divorce after 15 years of marriage, citing irreconcilable differences that translated to her wanting a different life than the one they'd built. Garrett had shown up to work for 6 months looking exactly like Marcus probably looked now. "You told me not to give up, that my kids needed to see me fight for what mattered. This is different." "How?" Garrett leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "How is this different, Marcus? You met someone good, someone who loves your kid, and you're walking away because her parents are assholes, because Sophie got hurt, because those people made her feel like she wasn't good enough. And what are you making her feel now?" The question landed like a punch. "You just taught Sophie that when things get hard, you quit, that she's the reason you can't be happy, that loving her means giving up everything else." Marcus opened his mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. He thought about Sophie's face when she'd screamed at him, the raw pain in her voice, when she'd asked if Victoria was gone forever. He'd been so focused on protecting her from future hurt that he'd missed the hurt happening right now, the damage he was doing by giving up. "Go home." Garrett stood, collecting his coffee cup. "Fix this before it's too late." But Marcus didn't go home. He stayed at his desk until the office emptied, staring at numbers that refused to make sense, trying to convince himself that he'd made the right choice, even as everything inside him screamed that he hadn't. Evelyn showed up at his house around 8 that evening. Marcus opened the door to find his sister standing on the porch with takeout bags and an expression that suggested she was prepared for a fight. "Julia called me, said Sophie's teacher reached out concerned because she stopped participating in class." Marcus stepped aside to let her in. Evelyn moved through the house with the familiarity of someone who'd been coming here for years, setting the food on the kitchen counter before turning to face him with arms crossed. "Where's Sophie?" Upstairs, she won't talk to me. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Yeah, well, can you blame her? The anger in her voice stung. Evelyn had always been protective of Sophie, stepping in after Rachel died to help with babysitting and school pickups and all the small logistics of single parenthood that had threatened to drown him. She'd been his biggest supporter through the years of grief and loneliness, which made her disappointment now feel even sharper. I was trying to protect her. From what? From being happy, Evelyn's voice rose. I met Victoria Marcus at Sophie's art show in March. She was kind and genuine and clearly crazy about both of you, and you threw that away because you're scared. Victoria's parents are terrible people. So what? Evelyn moved closer, her eyes blazing with a fury that reminded Marcus she'd inherited their mother's temper. That doesn't mean you let them win. That doesn't mean you teach Sophie that she's not worth fighting for. The words hit like physical blows. Marcus sank into a chair, his head in his hands, trying to breathe past the tightness in his chest. I don't know how to fix this. Start by being honest. With yourself, with Sophie, with Victoria. Evelyn pulled out the chair across from him, her anger softening into something gentler. You remember what you said to me when Mom died? I was 15, Marcus. I wanted to quit school, quit everything because the pain was too much. And you told me that grief doesn't mean we stop living, that Mom would want us to choose Joe even when it hurt. Marcus did remember. The months after their mother's stroke had been brutal. Watching Evelyn spiral into depression while trying to manage his own grief. He'd been 23, barely an adult himself, suddenly responsible for a teenage sister who'd lost the only parent she had left. Rachel would have fought for this. Evelyn's voice dropped to just above a whisper. She would have looked those people in the eye and told them exactly where they could shove their judgment. She would have chosen love over fear every single time. Don't what? Tell you the truth. Evelyn stood, moving to the photos on the wall. She stopped in front of one of Rachel holding newborn Sophie, both of them looking exhausted and radiant. You promised her you'd take care of Sophie. You promised you'd make sure she had a good life. Does this look like a good life, a 7-year-old who stopped drawing because her father taught her that happiness is temporary? The guilt was suffocating. Marcus looked at the photo of his wife, at the trust in her eyes, and felt like he was failing her all over again. Rachel had made him promise in those final weeks when morphine couldn't quite kill the pain that he would find happiness again, that he wouldn't let her death be the end of his life too. I'm scared. The admission felt like ripping open a wound. I'm terrified of loving someone and losing them again, of building something with Victoria and having it fall apart, of putting Sophie through that kind of loss twice. Evelyn returned to the table, reaching across to grip his hand. Being scared is normal. Letting fear make your decisions is cowardice. She left soon after, and Marcus sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the old house settle around him. Upstairs, Sophie's door stayed closed, the silence from her room louder than any accusation. He thought about Rachel's final words, about the promise he'd made, about the man he'd been before grief had taught him to expect loss. Around midnight, he climbed the stairs and knocked softly on Sophie's door. No answer. Sophie, please. I need to talk to you. The door opened a crack. His daughter stood there in her pajamas, eyes red and swollen, clutching the stuffed rabbit Victoria had won for her at a carnival in March. The sight of it made Marcus's throat close. I made a mistake, a really big mistake, and I need your help to fix it. Sophie's expression didn't change, but she opened the door wider, letting him into her room. They sat on her bed, and Marcus tried to find words big enough for what he needed to say. I was scared of you getting hurt, so scared that I pushed away someone who loves you. But I was wrong, Sophie. I hurt you worse than anyone else could have. Sophie's voice came out small and broken. They said I was bad. They were wrong, completely, totally wrong. Marcus turned to face her, fully needing her to see the truth in his eyes. You are not bad. You are not a burden. You are the best thing in my life, and anyone who can't see how incredible you are doesn't matter. Then why did you make Victoria leave? The question deserved honesty. Because I was scared. Scared of her parents always making us feel like we weren't good enough. Scared of building a life together and having it fall apart. Scared of losing someone I love again. Marcus took a shaky breath. But being scared isn't a good enough reason. I should have been brave instead. I should have fought for what mattered. Sophie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Victoria matters. She does. So I need to know something, and I need you to be honest with me. Do you still want Victoria in your life? Even if her parents never accept us? Even if things are hard sometimes? Sophie nodded so vigorously her whole body shook. Yes, I don't care about her parents. They're mean. But Victoria isn't mean. Victoria is nice. And she makes you smile. And she taught me how to paint sunsets. Marcus felt tears slip down his face. Then I'm going to try to fix this. I'm going to try to make things right. But Sophie, she might not forgive me. I hurt her really badly. She'll forgive you. Sophie spoke with the certainty of childhood, the kind of faith that didn't allow room for doubt. She loves us. They held each other on her small bed, and Marcus made a new promise not to his late wife this time, but to his living daughter. He would be brave. He would fight. He would stop letting fear make his choices. Morning came too bright and too early. Marcus made pancakes while Sophie got ready for school, and when she came downstairs, she actually smiled at him. It was small and tentative, but it was there, and Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. I'm going to call Victoria today. Sophie paused in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder. Promise, promise. But when Marcus dialed Victoria's number during his lunch break, it went straight to voicemail. He tried again an hour later with the same result. By the time he left work, he'd called 6 times and sent 3 text messages, all unanswered. The next morning, he drove to Brennan Tech Solutions. The glass tower looked exactly the same as it had in December, but everything felt different now. The receptionist, a different woman from before, smiled politely when he approached. I need to see Victoria Brennan. It's urgent. Do you have an appointment? No, but if you could just tell her Marcus Hayes is here. The receptionist made a quick call, her expression never changing from professional pleasantness. When she hung up, the smile had frozen into something less welcoming. I'm sorry, Ms. Brennan isn't available. Can I wait? I don't think that would be productive. Marcus stood in the lobby for 2 hours anyway, hoping Victoria would appear, that he'd catch a glimpse of her heading to a meeting or leaving for lunch. Security finally asked him to leave around 3, politely but firmly, and Marcus walked back to his car feeling hollow. That night, he sat at his kitchen table with a pen and paper, actual paper, because some things were too important for text messages or emails. The words came slowly, each one chosen with care. Victoria, I was wrong. I was a coward and I hurt you, and I'm so sorry. You were right about everything. I was so scared of Sophie getting hurt that I hurt her worse than anyone else could have. I took away the one person who made her feel whole. She misses you. She wants you back. And so do I. I don't need your family's approval. I just need you. I'm willing to fight, to stand up to anyone who tries to tell us we don't belong together, because we do belong together. Please give me a chance to prove it, Marcus. He drove to Brennan Tech at 7 the next morning before the office opened and left the letter with the security guard who was just starting his shift. The man promised to deliver it to Victoria's office, and Marcus had no choice but to trust him. 2 days crawled by. Marcus threw himself into work, double-checking every calculation, reviewing every filing, trying to prove to himself that he was still competent, even though his personal life had imploded. Garrett brought him coffee without comment, and the other accountants gave him space, probably sensing that he was barely holding together. Sophie drew her first picture since the disaster, a simple sketch of 3 people holding hands. She didn't say who they were supposed to be, but Marcus knew. He hung it on the refrigerator next to all her other art, a monument to hope. Thursday evening, just after 6, someone knocked on his door. Marcus opened it, expecting Evelyn or maybe a delivery he'd forgotten ordering. Instead, Victoria stood on his porch looking like she'd been through a war. Her hair was loose and tangled, dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she was clutching his letter in one hand like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Do you have any idea how much you hurt me? The question came out raw and shaking. Marcus stepped back, gesturing for her to come in, but Victoria stayed on the porch. I know. I'm so sorry. I thought you didn't want me. That I wasn't good enough because I can't give you children of your own. That you looked at me and saw someone broken. The pain in her voice made Marcus want to break things. He moved closer, stopping just short of touching her because he didn't know if he had that right anymore. You are not broken. You are the strongest, most incredible woman I've ever met." The words tumbled out urgent and desperate. I was the broken one, broken by fear, by loss, by the terror of loving someone again and losing them like I lost Rachel. Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "But you're right. My family does think you're not good enough. They made that very clear. I don't care what they think. You should care. It will be hard, Marcus. They're not going to suddenly change their minds and welcome you with open arms. Let them try." Marcus did reach for her, then his hands finding hers relieved when she didn't pull away. "I love you, Victoria. I'm in love with you. Not because you can solve my problems, not because Sophie needs a mother, but because you make me want to be brave again. You make me want to live again." Victoria's composure cracked. She collapsed against his chest, and Marcus caught her holding tight while she sobbed into his shirt. They stood like that for a long time, her shaking in his arms, him whispering apologies and promises into her hair. "I was so hurt. I thought you gave up on us." "Never again, I swear. Never again." Footsteps on the stairs made them both look up. Sophie appeared in the doorway wearing her nightgown and holding her rabbit, and when she saw Victoria, her face transformed with joy, so pure it hurt to witness. "Victoria." Victoria pulled away from Marcus just enough to kneel, and Sophie flew into her arms with the force of someone who'd been holding back for too long. They clung to each other, both crying, and Marcus felt his own tears fall freely. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry your parents don't like me." Victoria pulled back just enough to cup Sophie's face in her hands. "Hey, you have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. My parents were wrong, so wrong. But they said, I don't care what they said. I told them they can either accept you and your dad or they can lose me. Because you two are my family now, the family I choose." Sophie's eyes went wide. "Really, forever? Forever, if you'll have me." "Yes." Sophie threw her arms around Victoria's neck again. "I missed you so much." Marcus watched them, his heart feeling too big for his chest, and thought that maybe this was what redemption looked like. Not erasing mistakes, but having the chance to fix them. Not avoiding pain, but choosing love anyway. The weeks that followed were careful and deliberate, rebuilding trust that had been damaged. Victoria came over on weekends like before, but they were more cautious now, more aware of how fragile happiness could be. She and Marcus talked late into the night after Sophie went to bed, working through the hard conversations about expectations and fears and what it would mean to try again, knowing the obstacles ahead. "My parents haven't reached out." Victoria curled into the corner of his couch wineglass balanced on her knee. "I thought maybe they would, after I told them how serious I was, but it's been radio silence." Marcus wanted to say he was sorry, but the truth was he wasn't. Robert and Catherine Brennan had shown exactly who they were, and Marcus didn't trust them to suddenly develop empathy or understanding. "Are you okay with that?" "I don't know." Victoria's voice was small. "They're terrible sometimes, but they're still my parents. I spent my whole life trying to make them proud, trying to be the daughter they wanted. It's hard to just cut them off. You don't have to cut them off. You just have to decide what you're willing to accept." Victoria set down her wine, turning to face him fully. "I need to talk to them. Alone, without you and Sophie there, without the pressure of a formal dinner. I need to make them understand that this isn't going away." 3 weeks after their reconciliation, Victoria called her parents and arranged to meet them at the Capitol Grill Neutral Territory in downtown Denver. She told Marcus about it the night before, her hands shaking as she explained her plan. "What if they don't listen? What if I lose them?" Marcus pulled her close, feeling the tension in her shoulders. "Then you lose them. But you won't lose us. We'll be here no matter what." The dinner was scheduled for 7 on a Friday. Victoria left work early to prepare, and Marcus spent the evening with Sophie, both of them trying not to watch the clock. By 9, when Victoria still hadn't called or texted, Marcus started to worry. By 10, he was checking his phone every 30 seconds. At 10:45, Victoria's car pulled into his driveway. She came inside without knocking, and Marcus met her in the hallway. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes red, but there was steel in her spine that hadn't been there before. "I told them." Marcus waited, barely breathing. "I told them I'm going to marry you, that I'm going to be Sophie's mother. that I'm building a life with you both and they can either be part of it or not. Their choice. The words settled between them, weighted with everything they meant. Marriage, mother, a life together. They hadn't discussed those things explicitly, hadn't put names to what they were building, but hearing Victoria say it out loud made it real. What did they say? My father got angry. My mother looked like I'd slapped her. They said I was being ridiculous, that I barely know you, that I'm throwing away everything for a man who works in a cubicle and a child who isn't even mine. Marcus felt the familiar sting, but Victoria's hand found his squeezing tight. And I told them, I know you're kind. I know you're a devoted father. I know you make me laugh and see me as more than a bank account or business connection, which is more than I can say for every man they ever paraded in front of me. Pride swelled in Marcus's chest. How did they take that? Not well. Victoria's laugh was bitter. My mother said I was being unfair. My father said I was being emotional. I told them they have 1 week to decide if they want to be part of my life. After that, my door closes permanently. She'd done it, actually stood up to the people who'd controlled her life for 35 years and drawn a line they couldn't cross. Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her, while she shook with adrenaline and fear and relief. I'm so proud of you. I'm terrified. What if they choose to lose me? Then they're idiots. Marcus kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. And we built our family without them. 6 days passed in excruciating limbo. Victoria threw herself into work, staying late at the office and coming to Marcus's house after Sophie was asleep. She didn't talk about her parents, didn't mention the deadline she'd set, but Marcus could see the strain in every movement, the way she checked her phone compulsively, even though she pretended not to care. On the 6th night, she fell asleep on Marcus's couch, exhausted from stress and too many late nights. He carried her to his bed the first time she'd slept there and lay beside her in the dark, watching her breathe and hoping that whatever happened tomorrow, they'd be strong enough to handle it. The 7th day arrived without fanfare. Saturday morning, bright and cold, with Sophie making elaborate plans for a snowman if it would just snow already. Victoria tried to act normal, making breakfast and helping Sophie with her art project, but Marcus saw the way her hands trembled when her phone sat too far away. Evening came. 7 o'clock passed, then 8, then 9. Sophie went to bed and Marcus and Victoria sat together on the couch, not talking, just existing in the same space, while the deadline crept closer. At 11:47, Victoria's phone lit up with an incoming call. The name on the screen read Mother. Victoria stared at it for 3 rings before answering, her hand gripping Marcus's so tight it hurt. Hello. Marcus couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but he watched Victoria's face cycle through shocked disbelief and something that might have been cautious hope. Why? Her voice was barely above a whisper, a long pause. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Because you're our daughter, and we don't want to lose you. The words hung in the air between them, not an apology, not acceptance, but something. An opening, the smallest crack in a door that had been slammed shut. Victoria looked at Marcus, questions in her eyes. He nodded, not sure what he was agreeing to, just knowing that whatever came next, they'd face it together. We'd like to meet them again. Properly this time, if they're willing. Victoria's voice was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. I'll ask them. But Mother, this is on my terms. No mansion, no formal dinner. We meet at a park, casual. And if you say one unkind word to Sophie, we leave and you never see me again. Do you understand? Another pause. Catherine's response must have been affirmative because Victoria's shoulders relaxed fractionally. I'll call you tomorrow with details. She ended the call and set the phone down with shaking hands. Marcus pulled her close and they sat in silence while the weight of what had just happened settled over them. They want to try. I heard. I don't know if this will work. I don't know if they can change. Marcus kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. We'll find out together. Victoria turned in his arms, her face inches from his, and Marcus saw every emotion she'd been holding back. Hope and fear and love and determination all tangled together into something beautiful and terrifying. I meant what I told them. About marrying you. About being Sophie's mother. Her voice dropped to barely audible. Is that crazy? If it is, then I'm crazy too. Marcus cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks. I want that. All of it. You, me, Sophie. A family. They kissed with the desperation of people who'd almost lost everything, and when they finally pulled apart, Victoria was smiling through her tears. 1 week from tomorrow, Washington Park, 10 in the morning. We'll be there. Outside, the Denver night was cold and clear stars visible through the window despite the city lights. Marcus held Victoria close and thought about second chances, about the courage it took to hope after loss, about the family they were building, from broken pieces and stubborn love. Sophie slept peacefully upstairs. Her newest drawing, three people holding hands under a sunshine pinned to her bulletin board. And for the first time since Rachel died, Marcus let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, they were all going to be okay. The week ahead would bring new challenges, new confrontations, new opportunities to fail or succeed. But tonight, in this moment, they had each other. And that was enough. Washington Park looked different under Saturday morning light, the lake reflecting clouds that promised snow before nightfall. Marcus arrived early, Sophie bundled in her purple coat despite her protests that she wasn't cold. They fed the ducks while waiting, and Marcus tried not to check his watch every 30 seconds. Victoria pulled up at 9:55, stepping out of her car wearing jeans and a cream sweater that made her look softer than the armor she usually wore for family encounters. She walked toward them with careful steps like someone approaching unstable ground. "You came early." Marcus nodded towards Sophie, who was throwing breadcrumbs with focused intensity. Someone was too excited to wait. Nervous. Terrified. Victoria's hands twisted together. What if this goes badly? What if they say something cruel again? And Sophie, "Then we leave, like you told them we would." Marcus reached for her hand, squeezing once. "But maybe give them a chance to surprise us." The Brennan parents arrived 10 minutes later, and Marcus barely recognized them. Robert wore khakis and a polo shirt that looked stiff and uncomfortable on his frame, like he'd purchased them specifically for this occasion and wasn't sure how civilians dressed. Catherine had traded her pearls for a simple cardigan, though her posture remained rigid with discomfort. Sophie noticed them first. She stopped mid-throw, breadcrumbs falling from her hand, and for a terrible moment Marcus thought she might run. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, a gesture so reminiscent of Victoria it made his chest ache, and walked directly toward Catherine. "Do you want to feed the ducks? I brought extra bread." The offer came out small but steady, and Marcus saw Victoria's hand fly to her mouth. Catherine looked startled, like she'd expected anger or tears or anything except this simple kindness from a 7-year-old. Yes, thank you." Sophie handed over half the bag, then pointed toward the water. "That fat one is my favorite. I call him Duke because he looks fancy." Catherine's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Duke? Yeah, like a real Duke, all important and stuff." This time Catherine did smile, small and uncertain, but real. "I see. Show me which one." They walked to the lake's edge together, Sophie chattering about duck hierarchies and which ones were friendliest, and Catherine listening with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. Robert stood beside Marcus, and Victoria, hands shoved in his pockets, watching his wife and granddaughter with something that might have been wonder. "She's very forthright." Victoria tensed beside him, but Marcus heard beneath Robert's words, not criticism, observation, maybe even approval. "She gets it from her mother. Both of them." Robert's glance was sharp but not unkind. Rachel would have been proud of her, I imagine. The acknowledgement of his late wife, of her importance to Sophie's life, felt like an olive branch. Marcus took it carefully. She would have. An hour passed with surprising ease. Sophie showed them how to make the ducks come closer, which ones to avoid because they were territorial, the best technique for even breadcrumb distribution. Catherine actually laughed when Duke waddled too close and nearly knocked Sophie over, and Robert asked Sophie about school with what sounded like genuine interest. When the bread ran out, they walked the park's perimeter. Sophie ran ahead as always, checking back to make sure the adults followed. Victoria stayed close to Marcus, her hand finding his whenever Robert and Catherine weren't looking, like she needed the reminder that he was real and solid and wouldn't disappear. "She's very energetic." Catherine's observation held none of the earlier judgment. Marcus braced himself anyway. "She is. Keeps me on my toes." Raising her alone must be challenging. There it was, the opening for criticism, for reminders of everything he couldn't provide. But Catherine's tone was different now, missing the edge it had carried at that disastrous dinner. "It has its moments, but she makes it worthwhile." They watched Sophie cartwheel across the grass, landing in a heap and laughing at herself. Catherine's expression softened in a way Marcus had never seen, like she was looking at an actual child instead of an obstacle. Victoria tells us you're an accountant. How long have you been with Morrison? Robert's question felt less like interrogation and more like conversation. Marcus found himself relaxing fractionally. 12 years. Started right out of college. Garrett Sullivan and I came on the same week, actually. He's been a good friend. Loyalty matters. Robert's voice held something Marcus couldn't quite identify. Respect, maybe. Too many people jumped ship at the first better offer. They parted ways an hour later, no invitations extended, but no disasters created either. Sophie hugged Catherine goodbye, a quick impulsive gesture that made the older woman freeze before tentatively patting Sophie's back. Robert shook Marcus's hand with less crushing force than their first meeting. Victoria waited until her parents drove away before collapsing against Marcus, exhaling so hard it sounded painful. That went okay, right? It wasn't just me that actually went okay, Sophie answered before Marcus could. Grandma Catherine smiled at me. Did you see? She actually smiled. The word grandma hung in the air, unauthorized but not corrected. Victoria's eyes filled with tears and Marcus pulled both of them close, feeling something fragile and precious taking root. The months that followed developed slowly, like developing film and chemicals that couldn't be rushed. Second Sunday in June, the Brennans came to dinner at Marcus's house. Victoria cooked while Marcus helped, and Sophie set the table with careful precision, determined to prove she knew which fork went where. Catherine arrived carrying a bottle of wine that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly grocery budget. She looked around the living room with its mismatched furniture and child's artwork covering the walls, and Marcus waited for judgment that never quite came. Your home is very welcoming. It wasn't effusive praise, but it wasn't criticism either. Marcus accepted it as progress. Dinner conversation remained carefully neutral. Sophie's school, Victoria's latest contract, Marcus's work on a nonprofit audit that had uncovered significant embezzlement. Robert actually asked follow-up questions about the forensic accounting techniques, displaying knowledge that surprised Marcus. I had to learn the basics when I ran investment portfolios. Good accountants are worth their weight. The bad ones cost fortunes. Sophie helped clear the table after the main course, stacking plates with exaggerated care. When she carried them to the kitchen, Catherine followed without being asked. Marcus stood to help, but Victoria's hand on his arm stopped him. Let them. Through the kitchen doorway, Marcus watched Catherine examine Sophie's artwork taped to the refrigerator. The older woman paused at one particular drawing, a family portrait with stick figures labeled Dad, Victoria, and me, holding hands under a rainbow. You draw very prolifically. Sophie looked up from rinsing plates. What does prolific mean? It means you create a lot. You are very productive. Sophie's face lit up with the kind of joy that came from adult validation. Thank you, Victoria's teaching me about shadows and stuff. See, she grabbed a recent sketch showing improved depth and shading. This one's way better than my old ones. Catherine studied the drawing with more attention than Marcus expected. You're improving rapidly, that's admirable. The praise was stiff formal, but Sophie heard the approval underneath and beamed. When they returned to the dining room, Catherine's posture had shifted slightly. Some tension released. July brought Sophie's art show at school. Victoria invited her parents without asking Marcus first, and he only found out when he saw them in the gymnasium looking uncomfortable among the elementary school chaos. Sophie spotted them immediately and ran over, grabbing Catherine's hand to drag her toward the display wall. Look, this is mine. The teacher said it shows emerging mastery of perspective. Sophie repeated the phrase like she'd memorized it, clearly proud. The painting showed a park scene, Washington Park, Marcus realized, with 3 figures feeding ducks. The proportions were still childish, but the composition showed real thought, real observation of how people occupied space. Catherine leaned closer, studying details. The way you've layered the colors here in the water, that's quite sophisticated. Victoria taught me. She said you have to build colors, not just paint them flat. She's right. That's advanced technique for someone your age. Robert joined them, hands clasped behind his back like he was touring a museum. He stopped at Sophie's painting, then at the small blue ribbon pinned beside it. 3rd place. Well done. Sophie practically vibrated with pride. When her teacher called her away to help with refreshments, Catherine turned to Victoria with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. You've been teaching her. Some. She's got natural talent. Just needs encouragement. She's lucky to have that. Catherine's voice was so quiet Marcus almost missed it. Not every child does. The comment felt weighted with history with things unsaid, but Victoria just squeezed her mother's hand briefly before moving toward the refreshment table. August brought a new routine Sunday dinners, alternating between Marcus's house and restaurants, chosen for neutral territory. Robert started asking Marcus's opinion on financial news, treating his responses with consideration rather than dismissal. Catherine brought Sophie art supplies, expensive sets from specialty stores, and watched with barely concealed pleasure when Sophie threw her arms around her in thanks. You can call me Grandma if you'd like, if that's comfortable for you. Sophie's eyes went wide. Really? Really? The hug Sophie gave her was fierce enough to make Catherine stumble. Over Sophie's head, Catherine's eyes found Marcus, and he saw something in them he'd never expected: gratitude. September arrived with crisp air and preparations for Sophie's 8th birthday. Victoria planned an elaborate party inviting Sophie's school friends and insisting on renting a pavilion at the park. Marcus worried it was too much, but Sophie's excitement overrode his concerns. The Brennans showed up early, Catherine carrying a wrapped package that looked professionally done, Robert bringing a card that probably contained a check for an amount that would make Marcus uncomfortable. They stayed through the entire party, Catherine helping distribute cake while Robert actually attempted conversation with the other parents. When Sophie opened Catherine's gift, a professional-grade art set with pencils, charcoals, and paper that felt expensive just touching it, her shriek of joy made half the party turn. She hugged Catherine so hard they both nearly fell over. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is the best present ever. Catherine's smile was real and unguarded, transforming her face into something almost soft. You're welcome, sweetheart. Victoria tells me you're quite talented. I thought you deserved proper tools. Marcus caught Victoria's eye across the pavilion. She was crying, trying to hide it behind her hand, and he knew she was seeing what he saw. Her parents slowly, painfully learning to love. October brought an unexpected invitation. Catherine asked Marcus to coffee, just the two of them, and Victoria's face went pale when he told her. Do you want me to come? She specifically said, just me, it'll be fine. But Marcus's hands shook as he drove to the coffee shop. Catherine had chosen a quiet place in Cherry Creek with expensive pastries and the kind of clientele that made him acutely aware of his off-the-rack suit. Catherine was already there, sitting in a corner booth, and she stood when he approached. Thank you for meeting me. They ordered coffee, neither of them touched. Catherine folded her hands on the table, and Marcus recognized the gesture. It was what Victoria did when bracing for difficult conversations. I owe you an apology. Marcus had not expected that. He set down his cup, carefully, afraid his surprise would make him spill it. Catherine continued without waiting for response. That first dinner, I was cruel. I judged you unfairly. She paused, and Marcus saw how much the words cost her. I thought you were using Victoria. For her money, her connections, her success. I understand why you'd think that, but I was wrong. The admission came out stiff but sincere. You clearly care for my daughter, and Sophie is... Catherine's voice softened. Sophie is a remarkable child. Marcus felt his throat tighten. She is. Victoria is happy, truly happy. Catherine looked toward the window, not quite meeting his eyes. I haven't seen her like this in years, maybe ever. She makes me happy too. Catherine finally looked at him directly. I still think you come from different worlds. That's a fact, not a judgment. Marcus braced for the but. But perhaps that doesn't matter as much as I thought. Catherine paused. What matters is that you love my daughter, and that you're good to her. Are you? I try to be, every day. Catherine extended her hand across the table, not to shake, but palm up an offering. Marcus took it, and her grip was surprisingly strong. Then we'll find a way to make this work. It wasn't a warm embrace or tearful reconciliation. It was Catherine's version of acceptance given in her own stiff, formal way, and Marcus took it for the gift it was. That evening he told Victoria about the conversation. They were alone in his kitchen, Sophie asleep upstairs, and Victoria listened with tears streaming down her face. She actually apologized, word for word. Victoria collapsed against his chest, shaking with something between laughter and sobs. Marcus held her, feeling the weight of what this meant, not just her parents' approval, but the possibility of building something lasting, something whole. I have something to ask you. Victoria pulled back, wiping her eyes, and Marcus saw nervousness flicker across her face. Before he could respond, she slid off her chair and knelt on his kitchen floor, pulling a small box from her pocket. Marcus's brain stopped working entirely. Marcus Hayes. Victoria's voice shook but held steady underneath. Will you marry me? Will you let me be Sophie's mother? Will you build this messy, complicated, beautiful life with me? The world narrowed to her face, to the hope and fear and love written across it, to the ring box in her trembling hands. Marcus couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, could only feel his chest cracking open with everything he'd tried to protect himself from. Yes. The word came out choked. Yes. God, yes. Victoria's laugh was half sob. She fumbled the ring white gold band, simple and elegant, onto his finger, and then they were both on the floor holding each other like drowning people who'd found shore. Footsteps thundered down the stairs. Sophie appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and took in the scene with the quick assessment of childhood. What's happening? Victoria turned without letting go of Marcus. I just asked your dad to marry me. Sophie's eyes went wide. And he said, yeah. I said yes. The shriek that came out of Sophie could probably be heard 3 houses down. She launched herself at them, and all 3 ended up in a tangled heap on Marcus's kitchen floor, laughing and crying and holding on to each other like their lives depended on it. Are you really going to be my mom? Like really, really? Victoria cupped Sophie's face in her hands. Really, really, if that's okay with you. It's more than okay, it's perfect. They stayed on the floor until Marcus's back started complaining, then moved to the couch where Sophie wedged herself between them and demanded to see the ring approximately 40 times. She fell asleep there, eventually her head on Victoria's shoulder, and Victoria looked at Marcus over their daughter's sleeping form with eyes that held their entire future. We're really doing this. We really are. Planning a wedding while running a company and raising a child turned out to be its own special chaos. Victoria wanted simple and elegant. Sophie wanted princesses and sparkles. Marcus mostly wanted everyone to be happy and tried not to think about the cost of catering. The Brennans surprised him by offering to host an engagement party, and Marcus spent an anxious evening in their mansion watching Denver's business elite mingle with his work colleagues and sister. Garrett showed up in a suit that actually fit him for once and spent 20 minutes talking shop with Robert Daw about municipal bonds of all things. Evelyn cornered Victoria in the kitchen and emerged looking satisfied. She's good for you, don't screw it up. That's the plan. Sophie appointed herself unofficial wedding planner, drawing elaborate diagrams of dress designs and flower arrangements and insisting that the cake needed to be at least 5 stories tall. Victoria humored her, taking notes on everything while gently explaining that physics had opinions about 5-story cakes. August brought dress shopping. Victoria took Sophie and Evelyn, and they returned 4 hours later with a white dress for Sophie and stories of trying on approximately 7,000 options before Victoria found the one. She wouldn't let Marcus see it, citing tradition, but Sophie reported it made Victoria look like a fancy queen. September brought the bachelor party that wasn't really a party, just Marcus, Garrett, and a few other guys from Morrison going fishing at Estes Park. They sat by the water drinking beer and not catching anything, and Garrett threw his arm around Marcus's shoulders. You know, Rachel would be happy for you, right? That she'd love Victoria for making you smile again. Marcus had thought about this countless times, imagined conversations with his late wife, asked for signs that he wasn't betraying her memory. Yeah, I know. Good, because you deserve this, man. All of it. Victoria's bridal shower happened the same weekend, and Catherine surprised everyone by hosting it at the Brennan Mansion. Sophie helped with decorations, hanging streamers with more enthusiasm than skill, and Catherine led her without complaint. When guests arrived, Catherine introduced Sophie as my granddaughter, with visible pride, and Sophie beamed like she'd won the lottery. Early October arrived with golden leaves and mounting anticipation. The wedding was scheduled for the second Saturday at Denver Botanic Gardens during peak autumn color. Marcus picked up his suit, the good one, the one Evelyn had bullied him into buying, that actually made him look like he belonged in Victoria's world. Sophie tried on her flower girl dress at least once a day, twirling in front of mirrors and asking if she looked pretty enough. "You're beautiful, kiddo. Always." The night before the wedding, Evelyn appeared at his door with Chinese takeout and determination. "You look like you're gonna throw up." Marcus managed a weak smile. "Just nervous. Rachel would be happy for you." Evelyn said it matter-of-factly, not asking. "You know that, right?" That's what Garrett said. "Well, we're both right." She handed him a container of lo mein. "You promised her you'd live. You promised you'd make sure Sophie had a good life. This is you keeping those promises." They ate in comfortable silence, and Marcus thought about the promises he'd made to Rachel, to Sophie, to Victoria, to himself. Tomorrow he'd make new ones, standing in front of everyone who mattered, choosing love over fear, hope over resignation, the terrifying beauty of moving forward over the comfortable ache of looking back. The Botanic Gardens transformed overnight into something from Sophie's elaborate drawings. Golden leaves carpeted the pathways. Late blooming flowers added splashes of purple and red. In the ceremony space overlooking the Alpine Garden looked like someone had stolen a piece of autumn and concentrated all its beauty into one small area. Marcus stood in a side room trying to get his cravat to cooperate while Evelyn batted his hands away and fixed it herself. "Breathe, you look like you're about to pass out." "I'm fine." "You're a terrible liar." She stepped back, examining her work. "There, presentable." Garrett stuck his head in the door. 5 minutes. "You ready?" Marcus looked at his reflection, older than the man who'd married Rachel, with lines around his eyes, from years of grief and worry, and lately laughter. But alive. Still here. Still fighting for happiness. "Yeah, I'm ready." The ceremony space held maybe 50 people, close friends and family, arranged in simple rows. Marcus took his place at the front beside the officiant, a kind-faced woman who'd counseled them through 3 pre-wedding sessions. His hands shook slightly, and he clasped them behind his back to hide it. Music started. Sophie appeared first, a vision in white, carrying a basket of rose petals. She walked slowly, carefully, until she spotted Marcus and broke into a run, throwing her arms around his waist. "I'm so excited I can barely breathe." The guests laughed. Marcus kissed the top of her head and gently redirected her to her designated spot. She stood there vibrating with barely contained joy, and Marcus felt his nervousness ease slightly. Whatever else happened, Sophie was happy. That counted for something. The music changed, everyone stood, and Victoria appeared on Robert's arm. Marcus forgot how to breathe. She'd chosen simple elegance, lace and silk, that moved like water, her hair down in loose waves, flowers woven through it that matched the ones in Sophie's basket. But it was her face that destroyed him, the way she looked at him, like he was everything she'd been searching for, like he made her brave, like they were about to build something worth all the fear and pain it took to get here. Robert walked her down the aisle, and when they reached the front, he placed Victoria's hand in Marcus's with a solemnity that felt almost sacred. "Take care of her." "I will, I promise." The officiant began words about love and commitment and choosing each other, but Marcus barely heard them. He was too focused on Victoria's face, on the tears already tracking through her makeup, on the way her hand gripped his like she'd never let go. "Marcus, your vows." He'd written them down, practiced them, until Evelyn threatened to burn the paper. But standing here with Victoria looking at him like that, the memorized words vanished. He spoke from his heart instead, raw and unpracticed. "Victoria, before I met you, I thought I'd used up all my chances at happiness. That grief was all I had left." His voice cracked but held. "You showed me that love doesn't run out, that hearts can heal, that families can grow in ways I never imagined. I promise to be brave for you, to fight for us, to never let fear make my decisions again. I promise to love you, to honor you, to cherish you for every day I have left." Victoria was openly crying now, not bothering to hide it. She squeezed his hands and took a shaky breath. "Marcus, you gave me something I thought I'd never have. A family. A real family." Her voice strengthened. "Not based on obligation or expectation, but on choice, on love. I promise to be the best mother I can be to Sophie, to honor Rachel's memory by loving her daughter as my own. I promise to stand by your side through every challenge, to never give up on us. I choose you, today and every day, forever." The officiant smiled. If anyone objects to this union, speak now, or forever hold your peace. Sophie's voice rang out clear and certain. No, they're perfect together. The entire gathering erupted in laughter. Marcus and Victoria were laughing too, crying and laughing at the same time, and the officiant had to wait for the noise to settle before continuing. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Marcus pulled Victoria close and kissed her like they were the only two people in the world. Sophie's cheer broke through the moment, and then everyone was clapping. And Marcus was actually married to this incredible woman who'd asked him a crazy question on Christmas night and somehow made him believe in second chances. The reception was simple dinner, dancing toasts that made Marcus laugh and cry in equal measure. Evelyn stood up with champagne and raised her glass. To my brother who finally learned to be brave. Robert surprised everyone by standing next. To my daughter who taught me that happiness can't be planned, only embraced. Sophie's toast was loudest. To my new mom, I love you. The dancing started with their first dance, Marcus and Victoria swaying to music that felt too loud and perfect at the same time. Halfway through, Sophie ran onto the floor and Marcus picked her up, all three of them dancing together while cameras flashed and Marcus's heart felt too big for his chest. Later, when Sophie finally crashed from exhaustion and fell asleep on Evelyn's shoulder, Victoria pulled Marcus outside. The gardens were lit with string lights, autumn leaves crunching under their feet, and Denver spread below them with all its lights and promise. We did it. Marcus wrapped his arms around her from behind. We did. I was so scared. That day at the restaurant, watching you get rejected, I almost didn't say anything. I almost let you leave. But you didn't. No, I was brave instead. Victoria turned in his arms. And you were brave too. Eventually. Marcus laughed. Eventually. They stood together watching the city, and Marcus thought about the year that had passed since that Christmas night. Thought about grief and loneliness and the courage it took to hope after loss. Thought about Sophie sleeping peacefully inside, about parents who had learned to love, about building families from broken pieces and stubborn faith. 1 year later, Christmas Eve arrived with snow that had been threatening since morning. Marcus and Victoria's house, bigger than his rental, smaller than her penthouse, perfect for their cobbled-together family, glowed with lights. Sophie had insisted on hanging herself. The Brennans arrived first, Catherine carrying her famous apple pie, while Robert helped Sophie arrange presents under the tree. Evelyn came next with her new girlfriend, both of them laughing about something that had happened on the drive over. Garrett and his wife showed up last, armed with wine and stories about the office Christmas party Marcus had skipped. Sophie was 8 now, taller, more confident, her drawings covering the walls of this new house the way they'd covered the old one. She helped Victoria in the kitchen, standing on a stool to reach the counter, chattering about the painting she was working on in art class. Grandma said if I keep practicing, I could maybe go to a special art school when I'm older. Victoria smiled. Did she now? Uh-huh, she said I have natural aptitude, which means I'm good at it. Catherine appeared in the doorway, and Marcus saw the pride on her face, open and unguarded. That's exactly what I said. Natural aptitude and strong work ethic. A powerful combination. Dinner was loud and chaotic, everyone talking over each other, Sophie demanding to know when they could open presents. Robert and Garrett arguing good-naturedly about tax policy. Marcus sat at the head of the table with Victoria beside him and looked around at all these people, family now chosen, and blood, and everything in between, and felt gratitude so intense it bordered on pain. After dinner, while Sophie opened presents and Evelyn helped her assemble something that required approximately 7 million tiny pieces, Victoria pulled Marcus into the kitchen. They stood at the window overlooking the backyard, watching snow fall in fat flakes that caught the porch light. Remember where we were a year ago? Marcus did remember, sitting alone in that restaurant, rejected and resigned, thinking that was all his life would ever be. Hard to forget. I almost didn't talk to you. I'd convinced myself that being alone was safer than risking more rejection. Victoria leaned into him. I'm so glad I was wrong. Me too. Sophie's laughter drifted from the living room, followed by Catherine's surprisingly delighted response to something. Marcus thought about the stranger who'd asked him to meet her daughter, about the impossible hope that had grown from that moment, about all the ways love could arrive when you least expected it. You asked me to be brave that night. Marcus turned Victoria to face him. You didn't ask me to be your husband. You asked me to take a chance, to believe I deserved happiness again. Victoria's eyes filled with tears the way they always did when he got unexpectedly profound. And you said yes. Eventually. Eventually. Marcus kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. Best decision I ever made. Sophie called from the other room demanding they come see her assembled contraption, and they walked back to their family hand in hand. Through the window, Marcus could see his reflection, older but lighter, marked by grief but no longer defined by it, learning to hold joy and sorrow in the same heart without letting either consume him. Rachel smiled at him from the photograph on the mantel, forever young, forever brave, and Marcus felt her approval like a blessing. She'd made him promise to really live, not just survive. And for the first time since she died, he was keeping that promise. The snow fell harder outside, blanketing Denver in white, and inside the house glowed warm and loud with laughter and love and the beautiful chaos of family. Sophie showed him her contraption, something involving pulleys and plastic cups that she'd engineered with Catherine's help. Victoria stood beside them, her hand finding his like always, like coming home. Marcus thought about Christmas a year ago, about the woman who'd asked him an impossible question, about the courage it took to say yes to hope when fear felt safer. Thought about Sophie's laughter, about parents learning to love, about building something lasting from loneliness and second chances. Outside, the city sparkled under fresh snow, full of strangers having their own Christmases, maybe some of them sitting alone in restaurants, wondering if anyone would ever see them, really see them. Marcus hoped they'd find their own impossible questions, their own brave answers, their own journey from grief to this messy, complicated, beautiful life that was somehow more than he'd ever imagined possible. Victoria squeezed his hand. Merry Christmas, husband. Merry Christmas, wife. And surrounded by laughter and family, and the certain knowledge that choosing love over fear was always, always worth it. Marcus let himself believe what had once seemed impossible, that some endings were really beginnings, that broken hearts could heal, that the courage to hope was the bravest thing of all.